Okay, I think we are good. I have some viewers out there, which is awesome. It's awesome. Okay, there is a chat box on the side of your screen. So that I think is going to be the best way to go about questions. So if you would just type something really fast, and because this is my first time doing a live video with a classroom, and just let me know, just say hi or something. And anytime during the session, that is how you can submit your questions. I know I can see people are joining us, which is awesome. Let me make sure that I can see everything. And it's possible if you have, you might need a login for YouTube to submit your questions. So how this will work is on my Friday sessions, I plan on kind of doing more of a brief format. And that's just because I don't know how much or how little students will be able to submit questions on this. Again, I think you have to have a YouTube account to type questions, but that's a good opportunity for you to take advantage of during our Wednesday Zoom meeting. So I think what I'd like to do is take our Friday times to brief through the topic as I would in class. That way you have a visual aid. You know, I have a little muscle man here, and hopefully you can follow along in your lab manual. And whether or not you're participating with questions on the side or you submit questions to me via Canvas, it doesn't matter. You know, I'm still checking my messages. You can just mark those down in your lab manual and then send those to me afterwards. So let's see, what time is it? 12:03. Might give just a couple more minutes for people to hop on because we have a few more people logging on, I see. So the first thing I want to say is I hope you guys are doing well during this crazy time. And as you can see, I'm in our lab and it's very lonely and empty here. So I miss you guys and I hope you're doing well. And we really appreciate, I mean, you're not, whether you're willing or not, we're doing this online format thing, right? We're all kind of thrown into this. So just know that we're here for you. And we're going to do everything we can to help move forward as best we can. So I'm really hoping that the Facebook Live time at least will supplement as best as possible. So, okay, let me make sure I have my lab manual. I'm so sorry. Hold on one second. That might help. So I'll kind of start from the beginning and go over just some tips I have for you. The nice thing about the muscular system part 2, especially if you're one of my students, is that a lot of this is rote memorization. Now, if you are like me and you hear rote memorization, you're like, okay, I get that. This is not a very fun, exercise, but it's good in the sense that at least for this very first lab exercise that you're having to do all on your own, there isn't a ton of instruction, meaning you could learn all of this even if I didn't have this brief. So in that sense, that's kind of nice for this first week. In the upcoming weeks, you know, next week we're diving into the nervous system. You will probably want to log on to our weekly virtual office hour times, or at least watch this video. Remember, these YouTube live videos are automatically going to get saved and archived. It will show up like any of my other videos do. And I think that's good for those of you who aren't able to come to this live time. You can at least watch the brief whenever it works best for you. All right, so objective 1, we can ignore that. My students, we can ignore that. We were supposed to be building muscles out of clay and attaching them to this skeletal model we have. And so obviously we can't do that now. So don't worry about objective 1. Objective 2 is talking about specific actions and how they relate to the muscles that you had to learn the previous week. So, for instance, number 1 raises the eyebrows. And my biggest tip for this, I don't know if you've watched the YouTube video I made regarding this one, but my biggest tip is to start by just performing that action. So if you're at home in the privacy of your own home or wherever you are, okay, raise your eyebrows like that. And you should kind of say, hey, what muscle is right here? And compare that with the list that you had to learn the previous week. For my students, okay, the only muscle you had in this area that you needed to know was the frontalis. And we also call this the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis. But you would therefore say, okay, the answer to number 1 is the frontalis. On Canvas, we have a Quizlet card set that has all of these answers. So that is another very nice thing about this lab exercise being the first one that you're having to do online all by yourselves, is that you can use the Quizlet card sets to fill in your lab manual. So my recommendation, per the message I sent to you guys yesterday, is that I recommend that you try to fill in your lab manual using Quizlet on Canvas to the best of your ability. Don't worry about getting every single thing filled out, but if you can get the majority of the things filled out, I would do that. And then on our Wednesday, during our Wednesday Zoom meeting, that one is going to be more student-led. If you were there this last Wednesday, I kind of just let it open and let you guys kind of direct the questions, and I think that's a good way to use that. Whereas this one, you can kind of watch it, and I'll treat it more as a review session where I kind of go through everything. So that's why you're gonna hear me reference the Quizlet card sets a lot, because those are really valuable. So then number 2 draws the scalp backwards. Okay, this is kind of one that we kind of think, okay, drawing the scalp backwards, well, I can't really do that. And no, you can't really do that. But if you're thinking, if a muscle shortens, okay, if it's going to be drawing or pulling the scalp backwards, where do you think that muscle has to be? So you're thinking, okay, that needs to be somewhere back here. That absolutely makes sense. So again, looking at our muscle man or the pictures that you guys took the previous week, thank goodness we were still in class that week and you took pictures of your labeled muscle man, then it would make sense that the occipitalis or the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis, that muscle will draw the scalp backwards. So for this list here, and again, if you guys want to chat and ask any questions, I think how I'd like to treat the YouTube live videos is that I'll start from the beginning, I'll talk through, and then I'll wait to see if there are any questions for that specific section. And if I don't see any questions, then I'll just move on to the next part of the lab. So for the rest of Objective 2, use Quizlet to fill those in, but then combine some kinesthetic learning modalities, perform those actions so that you're getting away from just kind of staring at a list and it's making sense. So the number 3, closes, blinks, squints eyes. Okay, instead of just staring at your lab manual, actually do it. Oh, okay, I only have one muscle there that I had to learn from the previous week. That's the orbicularis oculi, so on and so forth. You'll notice that also within Objective 2, we are using the terminology we learned from the previous week. So adduct, flex, abduct, extend, dorsiflexes, plantar flexes. This is why I had you actually perform these in class, because I wanted you to get used to the motions so that when you were studying them the following week, you could actually perform those actions and it would make those answers make a whole lot more sense. Okay, so let me just make sure that I don't see any questions in the chat box now. So then let me talk about Objective 3, which is a very big table we had to fill in. For these muscles are the origin, insertion, and action for each one of the muscles that you had to learn the prior week. Some of these portions are filled in, which is really nice, so you're not having to fill in everything. But for the things that are not filled in, again, you can find that information on Canvas within the Quizlet card set. So I think that's a really nice resource for you this week. If you watched my video on this, I reminded you that the insertion moves towards the origin, and that's why in years past we've defined the origin as the less movable attachment and the insertion as the more movable attachment. Again, remember in class I gave you more specific definitions based on if we were talking about the axial versus the appendicular skeletons. But regardless of whether the attachments are superior, inferior, proximal, distal, you can think of when the muscle moves that the insertion will generally move towards the origin when that muscle contracts, and that's where that more movable part comes from. So let's just look at number one again, because we've been talking about this example, the frontalis, which is part of the epicranius there. The origin being the cranial aponeurosis. So this right here is a flat piece of tissue right here. It's a connective tissue. That's the cranial aponeurosis. And that connects the frontalis to the occipitalis. And that is why we call it the occipitofrontalis. So the origin of this muscle right here is the cranial aponeurosis. Oops, excuse me. And then the insertion is going to be, we see skin of the eyelids in the lab manual. We want to think, yeah, kind of the eyebrows and the superficial portions of the forehead here. But if the insertion moves towards the origin, you can see that that would cause the eyebrows to raise like so. Let me do, let's see, another one. Okay, let's look, number 6, the masseter. So the origin of the masseter, okay, which is this muscle, make sure you can see that, this muscle right here. Okay, so the origin of the masseter is going to be the zygomatic arch. That term should sound very familiar because of all that time we spent within the skeletal system. And the reason why during those 2 weeks we were in the skeletal system that we didn't just have you learn that this is the humerus, we made you learn specific parts, is because those specific parts come up again during this lab when you're having to learn origin and insertion. So now we're kind of tying it all together, creating bridges, and it's making a bit more sense. So the origin of the masseter muscle is the zygomatic arch, and then the insertion is going to be the ramus of the mandible, okay? The ramus of the mandible is this portion right here. Okay, that's that rounded portion. So if the insertion moves towards the origin, what do you think the masseter is going to do? It will elevate the mandible. That makes sense, right? Because if the insertion is moving towards the origin, it will elevate the mandible. It will also protract. Remember, protraction is an anterior movement. When we were giving ourselves nice hugs in class and our scapula were protracting, that works in conjunction with the temporalis, which will also elevate the mandible, but the temporalis will retract. So remember, retraction is a posterior movement. And together, and really the masseters, what I'd like to focus on, we call that the chewing muscle. So if you think, if you're elevating and kind of protracting and retracting, that gives us that chewing motion that we need. With the muscles and the actions, I highly recommend that if you can come up with some type of nickname to help you remember what that muscle does, it will also help you learn and remember which part is the origin and which part is the insertion. Meaning, okay, I know the masseter is right here. Okay, I'm trying to do better and not touch my face if you guys watched my video about me touching my face. Okay, if we know that the masseter is right here and it is the chewing muscle, okay, the masseter helps us to masticate, which is chewing. Okay, I think, okay, when I chew, I'm closing my mouth. My jaw is elevating because we always want to use A&P terms. Okay, my jaw is elevating, or the mandible is elevating. If it's elevating, it means this part is probably the insertion because the insertion is going towards the origin. Okay, so try to use that method to help you break these down. Same thing with the orbicularis oculi. We call that the blinking muscle. So kind of doing that because it's a sphincter shaped or a circular shape, which is what a sphincter muscle is. When it contracts, it will close. Okay, the orbicularis oris can be called the kissing muscle. The zygomaticus major can be called the smile muscle. Okay, so I think those are some other tips that could help you with that. As far as what you would need to know for a quiz, okay, you need to know these actual bony landmarks for the origin and insertion. For the actions, how I've always graded these, as long as you have given me one correct action or the primary action of the muscle, you'll get credit for that. A good example is the deltoid. The deltoid actually has, so make sure you learn the origin and insertion. I want you to know those structures. But there are 3 heads to the deltoid, okay? Because there's an anterior, middle, and posterior head. I do not expect you to say, okay, the anterior head is responsible for flexion and medial rotation, and then the middle head is the prime mover of abduction, and then the posterior is extension and lateral rotation. So I don't expect you to break the muscles apart like that for quiz purposes. Generally speaking, when you're just kind of looking at a list of muscle actions with the muscle, we would say that the deltoid is the prime mover for abduction. So when we go like this, okay, that is primarily the deltoid, even though there are 2 other heads of the deltoid that are doing other things. So I hope that kind of gives you a bit of relief when you're thinking about what do I need to know for the quiz. Let's see, some other tips that I can share with you are if you are a person who likes to work out, or even if you don't like to work out, there are lots of YouTube channels or videos of people working out using the terminology. Or you could even just look up some videos of some workouts and then quiz yourself. Say, okay, what body movement are they performing? What action are they performing? And then what muscle is responsible for that? Bodybuilding websites are particularly great for that because in the discipline of bodybuilding, those lifters are wanting to work specific muscles or specific muscle groups. And so the exercises that they are doing will be very specific to individual muscles or groups. So that might be a good resource that you could use to have another visual aid for this. Just taking one from our lab manual here. Okay, we have the rectus abdominis. Okay, here is the rectus abdominis. Okay, the origin is the pubis. Remember, that's part of the pelvic girdle here. The insertion would be the sternum, okay, and the lower ribs here. And when the insertion, when this muscle contracts, when the insertion moves towards the origin, it will cause, so what if I put the muscle man like this? If the insertion moves towards the origin, what would that do? That would cause flexion of the vertebral column. Okay. Remember, also, how do we know this is flexion of the vertebral column? Because if this were a 180-degree angle, okay, straight line, more or less, and we do a sit-up, what are we doing to that angle? Now I have made a 90-degree angle. A 90-degree angle is less than 180 degrees. So that means that because we're decreasing the angle, that is what the definition of flexion is. A nickname that you're probably are already thinking of right now is that, oh, okay, the rectus abdominis is the sit-ups muscle or the crunch muscle. And that's where it might be beneficial to look up some videos online of people working out or working out specific muscle groups to help you see that in action. Some other things I could say when you are going through these, I can't stress this enough. I recommend that you are looking at your resources, maybe the pictures that you took when you were in lab before we were dismissed for the due to our social distancing measures in place right now. But I also recommend that you perform the action to just put this in. You might be the type of person that goes through these tables and you can just memorize it. And to you, I say, no, I'm just kidding. But I wish I had your brain because I cannot do that. I had to, this type of lab just made me like, gave me the sweats because there was just a lot. And I knew there was no way I could just remember all of it. So getting active is the best way to do that. So let me just see, let me know if you have any questions over Objective 3 for my students and what we have there. Again, the reason why I'm not taking the time to go through all the answers or anything like that is because we have the answers already for you on Canvas. But I think it's valuable for me to give you some, or it's worth your time for me to give you some tips on how to actually study this stuff. For Objective 4, now we have our cat specimen. I do have a video on the cat. So after this video, if you haven't already looked at it, you can either just scroll through my videos or look through my playlists. And I have divided up all my videos by organ system. So if you go to the muscular system playlist, you will also find the video I made for the cat specimen. The first part of our Objective 4 says the following muscle should be studied on the specimen, right in the location on the body. So for this is very similar to an exercise we saw at the beginning of the semester. I don't want you to just get real crazy with this. This is meant to be an exercise that gets you visualizing where these terms are, which is really good in this class. If you can look at a term and you can visualize the area where you would find that, that is a really good starting point. So the masseter, if you're just thinking, okay, the masseter, I'm not exactly sure where that is on our feline specimen, but I'm going to guess right here. Okay. And that's a great starting point. As long as you're not saying, oh, the masseter's right here, maybe. Okay. Then you're in a little bit of trouble there. So for that objective, just be thinking about the main anatomical regions where you would find those. It's a good starting point. For the actual muscles that you need to know on our feline specimen, again, I have made a video of that, and I go through one by one. How I make these videos, especially the specimen videos, is I have our lab manual out, and I'm just starting at the top of the list and just going one by one, and I'm just pointing those out. For the feline specimen, you only have to know what the muscle is called. Okay, so you don't have to know the origin, insertion, or action for the feline specimen muscles. You just have to know, if you were to be shown a feline specimen muscle, you just need to know what it's called. Always remember, don't forget, I was going to say, always remember your rights and lefts. So let me just make sure there aren't any questions regarding that. Okay, so then we have a guided study at the end of our lab manual, And this is just another way for you to get this information into your head. We kind of have list format, a table format. I've told you, hey, perform these actions, kind of make sure that it makes sense of how and why these are moving. And so this guided study is meant to be just another way for you to look at this. Maybe in kind of like if you were just to read through a manual, or if you were to have a conversation with someone, I recommend that you fill this in and then you actually hold it and you should recite it, which kind of sounds silly. And you might be like, I don't want to do this right now, but I promise it'll be worth your time to do that. Again, you're breaking away from the monotony of looking at this information, which is a lot, the same way over and over and over. And I know we've all been there where you're just like 20 minutes later, you're like, oh my word, I can't look at this anymore. It's not getting into my head. So looking at it in a different way, we talk about perspectives a lot in my class. This is a great way to have a different perspective. So when you get through that, so for instance, just if I were to start reading it and say, the muscles of facial expression include the frontalis, which raises the eyebrows. How did I know it was the frontalis? Well, the next part of that sentence told me that. And then you can say, wait, what raises the eyebrow? Oh, that's right. The frontalis is right there. That's how you can confirm that. And then the next blank, what draws the scalp backwards? That's that occipitalis, okay? And then the next ones, which close, blink, and squint the eyes. Hopefully you're thinking orbicularis oculi. And then the last one, which pull the mouth into smile, zygomaticus major. So you start off by going slowly just to fill them in. And then you might just, because you can see there are different paragraphs, you might just pause, just do one paragraph at a time, because you want this to be manageable. You guys have a lot of stuff going on right now, right? A lot of change, a lot of things to get used to now. So just pause, and that was the first paragraph. So now let's just read it out loud. The muscles of facial expression include the frontalis. You should point to your body to, again, you're just constantly reviewing this, which raises the eyebrows. The occipitalis, which draws the scalp backwards. Let me try to draw my scalp backwards. Yeah, maybe you're just like, wait, please stop that right now. Okay, and I will. Okay, so the occipitalis draws the scalp backwards. The paired orbicularis oculi, which close, blink, and squint the eyes. And the paired zygomaticus major, which pull the mouth into a smile. It's really hard to talk while you're smiling, but will you forget that? Hopefully not. And then in Bell's palsy, the facial nerve, the nerve that controls most of these muscles, is paralyzed on just one side, and one side of the face droops. So when we're referencing to things that we might hear in lecture or those clinical applications we see in our textbook, it kind of helps make bridges, and you're like, oh, okay, some clinical application there. So that's how I recommend you use the guided study. And that's that for this first exercise that is completely on your own. So let me see if there are any questions. I hope I'm not missing any. It's possible you guys just aren't submitting any, which is fine. Okay, I don't think I'm missing any, but if I did, first of all, I'm very sorry. But second of all, just, when you get done watching this and going through your lab manual, as always, just send me a message on Canvas or through email and let me know what your questions are. You're always, you can always send me a picture of your lab manual. I'm more than happy to check it for you. I'm checking my messages. I'm trying my best to get everything answered the same day, but if I don't get back to you the same day, it'll be the next day, just because I'm up here a lot filming the content for AP 1 and 2. So that might be the only reason why I don't get back to you immediately. But if there aren't any questions, I really hope this video or this session time at least was helpful to you. Give me your feedback, because I don't want to spend time doing things that aren't helpful to you. So please let me know. Okay, I see a question. I'm glad the questions are working. I wasn't sure that they were actually working. Okay, so, and this is also something else I want to say. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, you won't be able to see the questions that are being submitted. So I will try my best to actually read the questions so that you know that something was asked. So thank you, Erica, for asking, could you explain the origins and insertions? Yes, and I should do that, right? Because that is pivotal to this exercise here. So for this goes back for my students to the previous week, when we looked at just some basic definitions regarding the muscular system. And the two big ones were the origin and the insertion. The origin and insertion are actually going to describe how the muscle attaches to the skeletal structure, meaning it will describe a region or an end of the muscle, but where it attaches to the skeleton. So this is why you may see the musculoskeletal system sometimes. So the origin, in years past, and I don't mind this definition, but I like that we're getting a bit more specific with it. But in years past, we've said that the origin was the less movable attachment. The insertion is the more movable attachment. And those are good definitions. But if you're like me, years later, I can repeat those definitions. But then I got to the point where I was like, wait, what does that actually mean? I personally did not connect those dots when I was a student. So I was able to define those, but I didn't really understand it. So shame on me, right? So what we've seen now and how we like to describe them is in A&P, we're really liking to use more anatomically descriptive words. So for the origin, okay, we would say the origin on the axial skeleton. So this is just a reminder. Okay, I know I've got my muscle guy here, but it works. We have the axial skeleton, which was made up of the skull, vertebral column, and the pectoral and pelvic girdles. And then we had the the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton is made up of the skull, vertebral column, and thoracic cage. Maybe some of you are like, what is she doing? You know what I need to do? Coffee. Okay, now I'll get my facts straight. Axial skeleton is the skull, vertebral column, thoracic cage. The appendicular skeleton is made up of the bones of the arms, the legs, and then the pectoral and pelvic girdles. So we're always bridging back to something we did prior. So the origin, if we're talking about a muscle on the axial skeleton, it tends to be the inferior attachment. That is not always the case, but generally speaking, we see that. Now, the head is a bit goofy because it's actually the opposite. But for a lot of the muscles, when you guys are going through your tables, the muscles, especially on the torso, that we will see that over and over again. And then the origin on the appendicular skeleton, okay, tends to be the more proximal attachment. Proximal meaning closer to the point of attachment or point of reference, okay, which would be the joints or where these limbs, these extremities attach to the torso. So again, the origin, years past, we've got kind of three ways of describing the origin. It's the less movable attachment. On the axial skeleton, it's generally speaking the inferior attachment. And on the appendicular skeleton, it's generally the proximal attachment. Those axial and appendicular skeletal definitions are meant to kind of help you organize all the information rather than being, a just in cement rule. So then the insertion is going to be just the opposite of that. The insertion is generally the more movable attachment. When we're talking about the axial skeleton, okay, it tends to be the superior attachment. Again, remember the muscles on the head are a little bit different. And then on the appendicular skeleton, the insertion tends to be the more distal attachment. This makes sense when we're looking at a muscle. So let me go very quickly. Let me just look up a specific example that I could give you. Okay, let's look at the triceps brachii. Okay, the triceps brachii, right here, it's on the back side, the posterior side of your upper extremity of the arm right here. Okay, the origin is going to be the humerus and the scapula. Okay, so humerus and scapula. The insertion is actually going to be on the olecranon process of the ulna. So here's something else I want to point out is that when we're looking at these origin and insertion points, remember, we just went over the basic definitions of that, but when you have to apply it to a muscle, it will be specific skeletal features. So the origin being the humerus and scapula, you could see that that did match our generalization that the origin was the more proximal attachment. And then the insertion was the olecranon process of the ulna, that the insertion tends to be the more distal attachment. Now, these muscles will cross a joint. And that's really important to understand that the insertion, a lot of times, and this is what I actually see in class when we make these muscles out of the clay, is whoever gets assigned the triceps brachii, for example, it's not just this, this is just an example, but you know, if you're like me, before you really thought about this, you know, they just put a little clump of clay right here. Well, that's actually incorrect because the muscle has to do what? It has to spread. If it doesn't cross a joint, it can't cause movement beyond that area. If the biceps brachii were just right here, it really wouldn't do anything. But we know that the biceps brachii has to cross this whole area in order for me to flex like that. Did that answer your question, Erica, with the origins and insertions? Going back to the older school definitions, when we look at the insertion being the more movable attachment, that's what I meant when I said, okay, once you have those origin and insertions and you're looking at the action, you'll find that that part that is labeled the insertion tends to move towards the origin when that muscle contracts, and it helps you make sense of what that means on a gross scale when you're looking at the whole body. Okay, very good. Good. That was an excellent question. I appreciate you asking that. Are there any other questions out there? Okay, well, with that said, that's all I will do for exercise 8. Again, for my students on a weekly basis, for my YouTube live sessions, I'll start at the beginning. I'll kind of talk about each objective. We can have a Q&A time. I think that would work best to do it like that. But always let me know. You can either comment on this video or just send me a message in Canvas. I really want this to be what you guys want it to be. The only reason why I'm doing this is to help you guys. So if I'm not doing things that are helping you, that's a big fat waste of time for everyone, right? So please let me know if this was helpful. I know there wasn't a ton for me to like really talk about for this week, but let me tell you, these upcoming weeks, like especially with the nervous system, we're gonna have a lot to talk about, and I'm hoping you guys will be able to participate and ask your questions in a live sense. Okay, well, with that said, I hope you guys are doing well and you're staying safe out there. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you, and I will see you next time. Take care.